Well, on the 9th of May 2022, the Federal Inland Revenue Service issued a public notice to the effect that it may only grant capital allowance to companies that are able to provide evidence of certificate of acceptance on fixed assets in respect of qualified capital expenditure between 2016 and 2021 years of assessment. The FRS intends to implement this directive from 31st of October 2022, but the directive is, however, at variance with the provisions of the Companies Income Tax Act, which makes it practically impossible for all companies to process the certificate within the stated time. Moreover, the implementation of the dated legislation will not only increase the cost of doing business in Nigeria, but there are ample reasons to note that the additional stress that it will create for taxpayers will eventually have a negative impact on tax revenue. Let's understand this better. And I'm being joined via Zoom by the head of advisory and transfer pricing services at Pedable Professional Services, Mr. Fidelis Chuku. Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. It's good to have you join us on the show.
Hi, Tolu. Good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Yeah, there is an ongoing controversy regarding companies' investments in assets and acceptability of such costs by the tax authority. What is this all about?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I will start by saying that the basis on which FIRS issued that circular, which is based on Industrial Expenditure Act, is not a new law entirely. The law has been there, in fact, since 1970. So what FIRS has done recently is to say that now for you to claim capital allowance, you must comply with the provisions of that particular act. And that act requires that before a person can make an investment in capital, make capital expenditure, you need to get approval. You need to inform that agency, which is the Industrial Inspectorate Division. That office is actually in the Federal Ministry of Trade and Investment. So the act requires that you must inform them. Then they will investigate. After they have investigated that expenditure you want to make, then they issue you a certificate of acceptance that is certifying that, yes, this expenditure is right for you to do. So FIRS now came up and said that, okay, even though in the past FIRS has been accepting capital allowances claimed by a company based on their investment in capital expenditure, now FIRS then said, going forward, we need the certificate of acceptance. And FIRS is now looking at, okay, we need it even from 2015 to 2020 financial year and going forward. And in that circular, FIRS then went further to say that if you are unable to provide the certificate of acceptance issued by this agency, then capital allowances you have claimed over this period will be withdrawn. Even though, like I mentioned, the act itself, which provides for obtaining this certificate of acceptance, did not specifically state that it's a condition for granting capital allowance or that FIRS must consider that certificate before they can grant capital allowance. But the law actually states that FIRS should take account of that certificate in exercise of their function. But of course, we know that FIRS is the agency of government responsible for taxation of companies in Nigeria. So that is what FIRS is saying. And they are then saying that all the companies in Nigeria that are filing returns, that you have to get the certificate of acceptance from 2014 financial year up to 2020. Now, if you then look at it, they said that must be provided before 31st of October. Is a failure of which they are going to withdraw all the capital allowances granted to all these companies for this period, thereby resulting to these companies paying additional liability, because capital allowance is a way of granting relief to taxpayers for expenditure they have incurred in acquisition of assets for doing their business. So that is just the summary of what that public notice is all about.
Well, brilliant stuff. Then, but do you think that the FIRS is right to make such demand going by the existing laws?
Well, Tolu, I think the issue is not about whether it is right or wrong.
Okay.
I would rather say it is about whether there is legal backing for what FIRS is saying. Okay. Now there is a law which is that Industrial Inspectorate Act, like I mentioned. the Act did not specify that FIRS must consider this before granting capital allowance. Okay. Now, Companies Income Tax Act is the law for taxing companies in Nigeria. And this Companies Income Tax Act has provided for conditions and all the criteria that must be fulfilled by a taxpayer before you can enjoy capital allowance. And all these conditions are stated in this act. There is nowhere in the Companies Income Tax Act where it is mentioned that in granting capital allowances to companies that FIRS must demand. And what we have seen over the years is the fact that in the course of filing annual returns, which is based on self-assessment, FIRS will normally not require taxpayers to justify or to provide evidence that they have been incurred
Right, Mr. Fidelis, are you there?
Yes, even companies that have provided this certificate of acceptance, FIRS will still go further to say, let me have third-party evidences to show that you actually incurred this cost. So looking at the Companies Income Tax Act, which is the regulatory framework for taxing companies in Nigeria, there is no basis for FIRS to say that they are rejecting tax returns filed by companies on the basis of non-provision of certificates of acceptance. So I would rather say that even though the law says that, yes, they should take account of that certificate, but saying that they are going to reject capital allowances on the basis of non-provision of the certificate of acceptance, I would rather say there is no justification for that.
All right, then. We had some issues there during when you were responding, but let's see if we could go on. Do you foresee any challenges in complying with FIRS directive and the law itself? And of course, how do you think these challenges can be addressed as a practitioner that you are?
Well, definitely there are challenges. There are challenges. One, the first challenges is, let's look at it from a FIRS point of view. FIRS has requested that these companies should provide this document between now and 31st of December. As of 2019, the Corporate Affairs Commission gave a data of about 3.1 million companies, registered companies in Nigeria. Now, let's say about 50% of these companies are in the tax net, which gives us about 1.5, 1.6 million. Now, we have how many months? And FIRS is requesting that all these companies should process a certificate of acceptance between now and 31st of October this year. Even if it's just for 1 year, it is practically impossible. That is one. Then we are talking about 6 years. So it is not it's not achievable. That's the first challenge with this. The second part of it is looking at the act itself. The act itself is is outdated. This is a 1970 act, and when that act was enacted, there was a threshold of about 20,000 naira that when you are incurring a cost of not less than 20,000 naira, you must get this approval. But from 1970 up to date, over time, that threshold was increased to 500,000 naira. And now we are in 2022. 2022, now, if you want to buy a laptop, it probably costs about that same 500,000. What it then means is that all companies in Nigeria, before you can buy a laptop, you must go and get an approval. Now, considering a company that is incurring billions or billions in terms of capital expenditure in a year. So that alone makes it impossible. again, is the fact that the ministry or the agency of government that is responsible for issuing this certificate, do they have the capacity to meet this timeline as demanded by FIRS? That is another challenge. It's impossible that the IID, which is the Industrial Inspectorate Division, it is impossible that they are going to process this certificate for all the companies in Nigeria that require this certificate in the last 6 years within a period of 5 to 6 months. That is impossible. So these are some of the challenges with the implementation of FIRS directive. And how do we get out of these challenges? Like I mentioned, the law itself is outdated. There is need to completely overhaul this law itself. The threshold of 500,000 is no longer achievable looking at the economic realities of today. That threshold has to be revisited. And again, there is a form of ambiguity in the law itself by not making a clear provisions as to whether this law or this certificate should be the basis for granting capital allowance. At the time of making that law, the objective at that time was basically for information gathering, for the purpose of national statistics and all that. So if government in its wisdom then deems fit now that yes, this should also be considered before a company can claim capital allowances, that should be stated in the law so that there will be no ambiguity, there will be no doubt in the minds of taxpayers. And like I mentioned, the threshold itself has to be increased. I think those are some of the ways to address these challenges.
Beautiful stuff. Now, let's wrap up on this note. What's your advice now to, let's say, taxpayers who seem to be, of course, in the middle of the whole controversies?
Well, my advice really is the fact that this law has not been repealed. And as long as the law has not been repealed, it means that the law has a full force of backing of the law. Then, even though the act itself, the penalties provided in the act is something that a taxpayer can easily say that, say, I don't mind, I will pay this penalty because it's between 200 naira and 400 naira in the original act. Now, the law is still there, like I mentioned. So the best thing is taxpayers still need to comply with that particular act by getting that approval from that agency of government for the capital expenditure they are making. In as much as there are challenges, there are issues with implementation or even processing that certificate itself. But as long as the act still remain valid, then there is need to comply with it. So that's my advice really is that taxpayers should always apply for this approval from this agency, just to ensure that they are not caught up with the law, because government can then wake up tomorrow and say that, see, we want to implement this, or even backdate it as far back as 20 years. And if government should do that, then taxpayers or the public that will want to invest, they will not have any choice than to still go and get it at that point. So it's better to just continue to comply, hoping that the law itself will be revisited soon and the necessary things will be done.
Interesting stuff. Before I let you go, Mr. Chuku, all about tax and revenue generation. Government seems to be so focused. Well, that's the way to go, obviously. But what is your assessment of all of this? And do you think, what do you think will be the performance, even of the FIRS, looking at figures that we should get in with all of these initiatives being introduced?
Well, you see, before now, government has relied so much on oil revenue.
Yeah.
And apart from recently due to the crisis in Russia and Ukraine, which has now led to increase in the price of crude oil. But in the last couple of years, we witnessed a very drastic drop in government revenue, which then made government to shift focus mainly to tax revenue. And if you then look at government revenue in terms of tax revenue in the past couple of years, you will see that there's been increase in revenue, tax revenue, and FIRS through all these, through various approaches, which include in terms of there has been more awareness, there's been changes in our laws, incentives, encouraging taxpayers, granting waivers where necessary. Of course, all these things has impacted on the tax revenue of a government in the last couple of years. And we expect that more people are willing to comply, even though there is still question of accountability or how is government spending the revenue. But of course, there has been increase in tax revenue, and we expect that it will continue to grow so long as government continue to provide conducive environment for businesses to operate well, because tax is based on a profit. If you are not making profits as a business, then the business is suffering, and government will also share from that losses. So government should try to make the business environment to be conducive, and as long as that is available, I believe that tax revenue will continue to increase.
Amos, thank you so much for your time. Interesting conversation there. Head of Advisory and Transfer Pricing Services at Pedabo Professional Services. Thank you so much, Mr. Fidelis Chukwu, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tolu.